welcome to the Intuitive Insights podcast series. I'm Nina Lockwood, founder and director of Intuitive Interim and Executive Search. Throughout this series, I will be sharing engaging conversations with talented leaders from across the UK transport sector. Hello, and welcome to a new episode of the Intuitive Insights podcast. I have wanted to have this particular conversation since I very first started the podcast back in 2020, and it seems that all I needed to do was ask. There's a lesson in there somewhere. I am delighted to welcome Andrew Haines, Chief Executive of Network Rail and the Great British Railways Transition Team Lead, to the Intuitive Insights podcast. I really do hope you enjoy it as much as I did. Andrew Haines, good morning and welcome to the Intuitive Insights podcast. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
It's lovely to be with you, Nina, and I'm genuinely looking forward to the conversation as well. I've listened to bits of some of the others, and I think you've got a brilliant knack of drawing out the real person. So it's
perfect, and it is some of the feedback that we've had over the 30 odd episodes that we've done is that people really enjoy seeing the individual behind the job title. It's so easy, isn't it, to just kind of write Andrew Haines. So to give you your full title, Chief Executive at Network Rail and Great British Railways Transition Team Lead. I'm assuming you don't try and fit that on a name badge because that's quite a long term.
No, I've got various name badges now, but that
So we like to see the person behind the job title. That's what these conversations are all about. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to you because people definitely don't want to listen to me waffling on. We're interested to hear your story.
Okay.
So why transport? Why the rail industry in the first instance? Talk me through right from the beginning, Andrew, please. Where have you been? What you've done? And who's been significant to you on that journey in terms of where your learnings come from, right up to present day? What's it like being the chief exec of Network Rail?
Well, that's about 3 hours worth in itself, isn't it, when you're as old as I am these days? So, well, if I start right at the outset, I fell into transport. I'm not a train enthusiast. I'm not a railway enthusiast. I'm an architecture enthusiast. I'm obsessed with architecture. But I come from a very, very working class background. So my parents my mum needlework O level. I think my father left school before that stage. So no sort of academic background from family and no expectation really that I would do anything particularly. But I came to university in London, and for the first year I lived right within about 500 yards of Victoria Station.
Right.
I was really intrigued by the logistics of transport, but also the people side, both the people you saw working there, but also just that human interaction and the purpose. And I didn't know what I wanted to do when I left university, but I knew I wanted to do something quite purposeful. I come from, I have quite a strong sort of personal faith, and I've always believed that, you have your life for a purpose. I didn't want to just fall into the slipstream of doing something for the sake of it. And I was going to do a PhD in architectural history. I'm not sure what the purpose of that would be. Right. And in those days, you could get a grant, and the grant landed on the doorstep simultaneously with an offer of a job with British Rail. I wasn't really sure what to do about that. Yeah. But I took a holiday job in Victoria Station. And did that for 3 months, and then really bit the bullet. So I joined the graduate management scheme within BR. Right. Brilliant scheme, particularly at that time, because it allowed you to do lots of different things. There were jobs called traffic managers, which meant effectively you were a station manager, but you were also what in these days we'd call a local ops manager and a mobile ops manager. So you did instant response, you looked after signals, but you also had the retail inside. Meant you weren't actually brilliant at any of them, but they were fabulous, good grounded jobs because you got a whole industry perspective. So when I talk passionately about track and train, it's because I've had the benefit, albeit in early years of my career, of seeing how an integrated railway works. Yeah. And I went on, so I did that for 3 or 4 years after the management training scheme. And I saw there was a job in advertised to work in Parliament. working for a chap called Chris Alston, who ran the parliamentary affairs team, and they were building up their capability from one person to two people on the back of the Channel Tunnel works and the preparation for that. So Chris employed me to set up an office in Parliament, just across the road from Parliament, and to work there. And I loved that because I like politics, I like current affairs, and to blend the railway and politics together was amazing. I was there the day that Margaret Thatcher resigned. I met lots of different journalists. It was really interesting because it gave me brilliant insight into how the media and how political media works. It gave me really good exposure to senior people. In those days, the chairman of British Rail was God. I met both the Bob Reeds and Sir Robert Reed, the first of those. When my boss was on holiday, I would brief him directly, and I used to joke I was more junior than the chauffeur. It was probably the only job he had that sort of encounter. And it gave me brilliant access at an early stage to people who were inspirational, who I saw took big decisions. It meant that I had a seat around the table in political conversations early on. And I did various things, worked for a guy called John Palmer, who'd come from being the number 2 in the Department for Transport, but came to work for BR, initially to set up the Channel Tunnel programme, but also then led the privatisation programme, because in 1992, John Major was elected as Prime Minister and decided to have a go at rail privatisation. Margaret Thatcher not touched it in her period, but he decided to have a go at that. And so through John, I ended up working in the privatisation policy unit, and it's this amazing symmetry of my career that when I was in my mid to late 20s, I was involved in a very junior level in the privatization and the setting up of all these new structures. And now, 30 years on, I'm involved now in restructuring that. And it is an interesting point that, the structures haven't really moved on in those 30 years. Right. I went to work for Railtrack at privatisation, worked with a guy called Chris Jago, who was very good, very, very supportive of me. We weren't natural bedfellows, but I saw in him a good leader, a good disciplines, and he saw in me some talent, and so he promoted me a couple of times. And then I got headhunted to work for Stagecoach. And Southwest Trains by a chap called Graham Eccles, and who was a long-standing railway person. Many people know Graham, a bit of a legend. Started off as a junior porter, and ended up, as one of the very senior figures. He's on the board of Network Rail, ran Stagecoach's portfolio on the board of Stagecoach for a long time. And I think I'd only really encountered Graham when we'd been negotiating our contracts in Railtrack, and if you like, we had quite a robust relationship. It was a strong commercial thing. I was the young kid who was trying to make a name for these things, but I think we respected each other, and Graham saw something in me, don't know what, so he got me to come and work in Southwest Trains. And I was there about barely 18 months, and I got promotion to operations director. And he said, "Look, one day you're going to be managing director of Southwest Trains." And I just thought those are easy words to say. Yeah. But within 18 months, there was some upheaval, let's just say, in Stagecoach. I often talk about this because it's an accident of something entirely out of my control. There was an upheaval, and which meant that Graham rapidly got promoted. And the Stagecoach way is they trust people. If you've done a good job for them, if you've busted a gut, you've delivered, and your values are similar, then they don't go out to the market to recruit. I know that's not great news for headhunters, but they say, "Look, we trust people. We're going to give you a go." And so they gave me a go, and I became MD of Southwest Trains. I was just my 36th birthday. I was the youngest MD, I think, of what was then the largest train company. Loved it. Still the best job I've ever had, because it was a time when you could do things. Did that for 4.5 years. We turned it around from being really a struggling company to one that won won the National Rail Awards across the board, all the different categories. I mean, in terms of the Rail Business Award, the National Rail Awards, all of them in the year I left. but I went to work for First Group to run a portfolio, First Group's rail division, because it was diverse. And I knew that First Group were a very different company. And I did that for 3.5 years. Fair to say it wasn't the happiest time of my life. I think my values were less well aligned. And I decided quite over a period of time, after about 3.5 years, I just decided it wasn't the place for me and to step away. I didn't know what I was going to do. I had no guarantee of a job. But fortunately, First Group assumed that I'd been headhunted, so they put me on 6 months gardening leave, which was very good. Right. It meant I was paid to stay at home and find another job.
Yeah.
And of course, all my career up until that point had been the railway. So I thought, well, I didn't know. I slightly mishandled how I communicated my departure. So there was a little bit of, silliness about gossip and things like that, which I had to put right. But I knew it was the right thing to do for my mental health and for my own reputation. And I was very fortunate. I actually got offered 4 different jobs in that period. And the one that really ultimately attracted me was to work in civil aviation. So I ran the Civil Aviation Authority. Yeah. Really interesting. Within 6 months, got the AF Wheeler Yerkle volcano. So go straight away into that. Got into work, had to work on new legislation, work on the really big safety incidents internationally and nationally. Worked with a brilliant chair, Dame Deirdre Hutton, who remains a good friend, and another person who's been an inspiration to me, somebody of real integrity, somebody who really believes, again, in purpose-driven leadership. And I did that for nearly 9 years, and I stayed on because of Brexit emerging and for the runway at Heathrow. But I knew it was time to leave at the end of a fixed period. And just as I was coming to an end, I was approached by Sir Peter Hendy, who I knew vaguely. We'd maybe met 2 or 3 times in the previous 20 years, but didn't know much more than that. Who'd been told that I was somebody to think about as Mark Carn's successor. Look, it wasn't part of my plan. I was going to do it out and have a portfolio career, but it was. Peter can be quite persuasive, as you might know if you've met him. And I did a lot of due diligence, spoke to lots and lots of people. But I decided to pitch for the job, and I was appointed almost 5 years ago now. Yeah. And Peter's been brilliant to work with. I mean, he is an absolute legend. I know very few people who have Peter's strategic thinking, energy, commitment to people, real focus on detail simultaneously, and yet still a human being. Yeah. So, in terms of people who've influenced me, I would say Chris Jago, Graham Eccles, John Palmer, Deirdre Hutton, Peter Hendy. I've had the real privilege to work alongside different ways. And I would say Chris Austin, who's a very, very different person to those others, very quiet, but actually probably half a dozen people who've been really have shaped my career. And of course, when you give so much to your career, shaped my life as well. Yeah.
One of the things that's emerging as a theme here, Andrew, as you kind of taken us through your story and with those people that you've mentioned, there's things that I've kind of scribbled down on my pad, which are, he saw something in me. I don't know what. So Sir Peter Hendy had been told you were someone to think about. Yeah. There's another comment around it's kind of what he saw some talent in me. So I think this was John Palmer saw some talent in me. So I'm going to put you on the spot, and I do this quite often, so I'm not just picking on you, but what did they see in you? Just kind of putting that humility to one side and say, what did they see in you? It was very early in your career.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, you're not where you are now in terms of us being able to give a long list of, these are the things these are Andrew's strengths. What have those individuals seen in you early doors?
Well, I think the first thing I would say, look, for me, the humility is not it's not an affectation. I know. It's very genuine because, in the universal context, you're tiny. The chief executive of Network Rail is a nothing in the context of what happens in the world. I think, look, I'm very proud of my working class roots. It means I don't have I've never needed airs and graces, but also it means I've never felt I've had to prove anything. So if I do something, it's because I believe in it and I'm committed to it. I don't do it for the sake of ticking somebody else's box. I have a very strong work ethic. I think because of my background, I've got a decent EQ as well as a reasonable IQ.
Yeah.
And so I think, funny enough, I was listening to a podcast this morning, the lead-in one with Alistair Campbell, and Tony Blair was on it talking about the Northern Ireland Peace Post, and he said, look, if you're going to be a leader, he was talking about politically, he said, you have to be able to feel things as well as think things.
Wow,
and it was interesting to say that. And I think, I think I'm able to feel things as well as think things.
Yeah.
I would say that, and I've had a lot of luck. I think the thing I've learned a lot, if you're busy leaders, you need shortcuts. And so I always say to people when I give them advice, be humble, but be hardworking.
Yeah.
So if there is an element of convenience for people. If you work with somebody who can get things done for you, why do you to look away from them to look for somebody else? Yeah. So I do think a lot of it is and again, it wasn't that I made strategic career choices. I did jobs I knew I'd be interested in and that I could commit wholeheartedly to. They then allow you to thrive. And if people see you thriving, they say, well, okay, this person's getting results. So I think that's how I would summarize it. But of course, you might want to ask them. Yeah.
No, I think that's a really good explanation. And I think that kind of no airs and graces. Yeah. And that I think from my perspective, and certainly from what other people say to me, is that you're very approachable. And I think that's kind of part of that human bit as well. And, you talked right at the beginning of your career where you had access to these really senior people who at the time were not accessible, were they? It's not like it is now.
Absolutely.
We wouldn't be able to, and I imagine that we wouldn't be calling you Andrew. It would be Mr. Haines. It's kind of going back in the day. So things are very, very different now. Absolutely. In relation to that. Everybody being a human being within a system that we work in, and having another word that you used as well earlier, having the respect. Because you've earned that respect, because you've delivered, because you were trusted to deliver.
Absolutely.
And this is something which has come out from so many of these conversations with your colleagues who've also been in the rail industry for a very long time. So people like Chris Green, people like Mark Hotwood, who've said to me they were trusted to get on with it.
Yeah.
So this seems to be.
Well, I was one of the ones who trusted Mark Hotwood. Yeah. I appointed Mark.
Absolutely.
For that person, in a really difficult circumstance.
Yeah. So how's that changed? In terms of that freedom to get things done. It doesn't feel like we have quite so much wriggle room these days to trust people to get on with it.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a really astute observation. I think the first thing to say is that we mustn't use that narrative too much in the industry. When so I'd been out to the industry for close to 10 years, and I came back and I was in a meeting with a very, very senior group of people, senior leaders, some of the most senior people in the industry. And I did need to say to them, I said, look, you sound like a bunch of overpaid victims.
Right.
You're very good at saying, and that sounds as if I was doing it in a hectoring. I wasn't. I said it compassionately, but I said, look, come on, guys. And it was largely guys. Yeah. That should be no surprise to you.
Yeah.
We're spending our time moaning about what's wrong. There's still a huge opportunity to embrace. But I think it is definitely more, there's definitely less flexibility. I think people are more hesitant, partly because of your sense of accountability now is very, very different. I mean, instantly you were talking, I've recently had some very, very robust exchanges with an apprentice who shows none of the respect that we would historically, none of that deference.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not actually, in this case, I think he actually gone a little bit too far. But the point is, today's generation expect a degree of directness.
Yeah.
And they're also, they expect to have their rights and their identities respected. And I think that, for a start, can make people more hesitant in discourse. Then, of course, alongside that, you've got the state of the industry at the moment and the level of direct government intervention, which I think everybody, including our Secretary of State, says is an act of madness.
Yes.
And certainly we are seeing more direct government control of our industry now than ever in my lifetime, and probably in the history of the railway.
Yeah.
And that mustn't continue. And I don't want to get into the politics around that, but I think it's hard for people to feel that sense of hope if they're feeling crushed. And yet at the same time, I think senior leaders feel nervous about not saying the right thing, or saying the wrong thing unintentionally, or saying something which could be misinterpreted. And I think the dialogue at the moment doesn't feel as transparent for those reasons, really.
Yeah.
But it's all fixable.
Yes, and maybe when I get my magic wand out in a few minutes, we might kind of be able to focus in on the areas that you would like to fix and that you would see changing. But I do think that one of the observations I have looking into and being part of the industry is that the skill of leadership is changing and has changed quite significantly. So there are lots of situations that I think you find yourself in as a leader, as a very senior leader, which you may not have had the training for at the beginning. And any number of excellent graduate schemes, however many years ago, would not necessarily have given you the tools. And I think you make a really good point about the emotional intelligence being as important as the actual intelligence, if you like, the EQ and the IQ. And I absolutely love that quote, and I'm going to use that ad infinitum, to feel things as well as think things. I think this is amazing. So I think leadership is changing, and my observation is that people do need more support in terms of how to do that, in how to lead.
Definitely. It's much tougher, tougher.
Yeah.
When I think about how, I might have dealt with things, when I was a junior or middle manager, a lot of those ways are not available to people now. Either because the legislation has changed, or indeed because people would misinterpret your motives and you would feel vulnerable. Yeah. There's a different type of risk appetite. And I say that because I don't think I ever treated people badly in that context. I'm more than happy to have people sort of challenge me on my behaviors, but it is not, we have to respect the fact that today's generation have different needs. I have children of my own. I see mental health profiles of young people. I know colleagues, phenomenal number of my colleagues have children who are having to deal with really challenging mental health issues. And I went back to my university, King's College London, for a dinner probably 6-7 weeks back, and they just said, they spend a huge amount of their time. My wife has just become governor again at a local school. 3 full-time people in a primary school dealing with pastoral care. Yeah. We can't deny that. If we as leaders somehow think, that's not a live issue, if we use the snowflake language and just suggest that somehow, that not only is it deeply disrespectful to people, it will harm our businesses. We have to reflect the fact that the people we're dealing with have grown up in a different context. They have different needs, different expectations, and we have to nurture them. And we have to, like you said, we have to do that differently, don't we? Because we've got, as well as having that aging workforce that we're kind of well versed in terms of the rail industry. There was some stats shared at the Women in Rail conference in March that less than 3% of our workforce within the UK rail industry is 25 years or younger. So not only are people falling off the scale at the other end, at the kind of getting ready for retirement, eligible for retirement, but don't want to go just yet, but it's imminent. We've also got a huge issue in terms of, where does the succession plan come from? Absolutely. Because we're not sticking enough people in at the other end of the funnel. Absolutely. So we're digressing because there's so much that I could ask you about and want to talk to you about. But just kind of in terms of that career story, Andrew, before we move on to me giving you the 3 wishes for what you'd change, just tell us what a week in the life of the Chief Exec of Network Rail looks like. What do you actually do day in, day out? Wow. Well, one of the things I love about this job and the senior jobs I've done is the sheer variety. Yeah. Why don't we just take today, right? if I just literally tell you what I've been doing today,
I'm
getting my diary out so I can remember. First of all, I try and go to the gym in the mornings. So I get up really early. So I left home at 5:15 to be in London to be in the gym. But that really gets my sort of adrenaline going. I had a meeting with a whole range of different people then before this on footbridges. I know it sounds really odd, but one of my passions is if we're going to make a better, make the roadway much more accessible for people, we've got to get the way we deliver footbridge schemes down much more affordable, much more quickly. So bringing very diverse people to sponsor that. We're doing this now. An hour after that, I've got a meeting with the Permanent Secretary and the Director General at the Treasury on rail reform and how we can unlock some of that. At the end of that, apparently I've got delayed birthday cake. It was my birthday 2 weeks ago, but I've not been in the office with the team. Yeah. And then doing a video for a national supply conference. So for that, I've then got a meeting with some non-executives of some of our supply chain. I've then got a meeting with Andy Lord from TfL on operational preparedness for the next phase of the Elizabeth line. I'm then going to my son's wedding suit fitting. Right. And then I've got dinner with Bernadette Kelly, the Perm Sec. That's today.
Good Lord.
Yesterday I was out and about. Tomorrow I'm on my way to Scotland. So it's hugely varied. Yeah. I love the fact I can be doing, operational stuff. I can be talking to people, be talking about high politics. All of it. It's very, very diverse.
The variety of that, and also the level of it, Andrew. The kind of you're kind of meeting with, obviously, as a senior person yourself, you're meeting with other senior people, having these conversations, and kind of being real part of the change and transformation that needs to take place, not just in the rail industry. This is kind of bigger than that, isn't it? One of the things that I know I asked you about when we were together in January was this kind of, you mentioned that you were going to the gym. Yeah. And this really struck me, and it's come back to me several times since, because I said to you, oh yes, that'll give you time to think about your day, and you were like, no, I don't think about my day, that is my time. So that real ring-fenced well-being, mental health time that gets you ready to be able to do a day like that, 5, 6, I would imagine sometimes 7 days a week.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, as I said, we were talking about the bank holiday. I worked the bank holiday yesterday. I'm out and about visiting because we do so much work. I'll be in London for the coronation, hoping nothing goes wrong, but being there supporting teams.
Yes. Watching it all go right, Andrew. That's what
absolutely.
You'll be doing next
really
week,
standing shoulder to shoulder with front line, and and those sort of exciting national moments, but where the railway plays a real role. And I suppose one of the things I have done recently, though, is I do listen to podcasts in the gym, not about work per se, but what I find, of course, is that if you're stimulated intellectually, a bit like the Tony Blair thing I was talking about earlier on, there's a read through to work. So I don't feel it doesn't have to be a sort of concrete divide, but it's stuff I do for myself.
Yes,
it's not for Network Rail, and I don't do it for my role in Network Rail. I do it because I'm an inquiring, inquisitive. I'm a nosy Parker, basically.
Yes, and that's why I love them. I love the first one that I started listening to more often is the High Performance podcast. Yeah, and I resisted it for ages because my husband started listening to it, and every person he said to me that he'd listened to and enjoyed was a sports person.
Right.
And I'm not, I'm not really bothered about football or whatever. Yep. These are not people that would naturally interest me enough to say, right, I'll get me AirPods in and I'll go and listen. But actually, when I got over myself and I tuned in, then that ability, the leadership for a start, there's a cracking episode with Toto Wolff from in terms of Formula One, and his leadership of a very high performing team.
Absolutely,
it's fantastic to listen to. So that food for thought, food for your brain, and the inspiration, it makes a difference. So let's talk
about people who disagree with you as well. That's what I quite like.
Yes,
I like the rest is politics, not because I always agree with everything they say, but they talk. Their principle is constructive disagreement, effectively, that they can come from different perspectives, but have a good, honest, challenging debate.
exactly. That's really important, isn't it, in terms of that diversity of thought? Because I would imagine the higher up you go, not looking at you necessarily, but any senior leader, I would imagine that disagreement with your point of view becomes less over time, because people will want to agree with you for obvious reasons. So having people who can challenge, but challenging that in a robust way, which is another word that you've used a few times, and I absolutely definitely agree with that, but challenge with respect from both parties, so that we can disagree, but we do it in the right way.
I'm not a huge fan of social media for a variety of reasons, but one of the things I do see is that social media does give a voice. Within the organization we use Yammer, and it's not used as widely as I'd like, but you do have people who are prepared to dissent on Yammer with company policy, with views, and sometimes they're frankly they're just wrong. Sometimes they're a bit offensive, but what they do is they remind you that not everybody sees the world the way that you see it, and very often they are very good insights to share. There is that tool, there is the democratization that comes with social media, which in the right context can be a useful prick to the bubble of the chief executive.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, completely agree with that. I am mindful of our time, because you have got a hard stop. So I'm going to quickly get my magic wand out and wave it and say to you, Andrew, I'm giving you 3 wishes for things that you could change. I'm going to encourage you to take the limits off, and kind of, there will be lots of things you want to do, but your mind immediately might go to, but we can't do that for this and this reason. But if we could only focus on 3 things to affect the kind of change that you would like to see in the industry, what would those 3 things be?
In the industry, all right. When you said it at the beginning, maybe you're thinking about the world, so it's industry. Okay. Right. So, industry, I would say, first and foremost, track and train P&L. What do I mean by that? I mean that we look at whole system decision making. Yeah. So we take the right decisions for the system as a whole. There's loads of brilliant stuff came out to the privatization that happened and the restructuring 30 years ago, but it was never designed to accommodate growth. It was being designed at the low point of passenger usage. And I think getting track and train together in whole system decision making is by far the biggest step. Right. I would say, secondly, industrial relations drags us back. I think what I find really, really hard in my job, particularly during last year with the industrial action and the strikes, was historically a lot of frontline workers in the railway simply do not believe the management and leadership. They default to believe in the trade union. Now, I'm not asking them to not believe the trade union. Yeah. But I would, if I had a magic wand, it would be that people stop and think about the issue and listen. I think what we see too often is people are binary. They vote, the union look after me, therefore I'll go for them, or management can't be trusted. And I think that's done immense harm to individuals and to the industry. Mm. And it has meant that the dialogue we have then with trade unions, and I was a trade unionist myself for 25 years. I was a member of a trade union for 2.5 decades. So I'm not saying they're not a good thing, but the dialogue needs to be an honest, open dialogue where people listen. So I would absolutely change that. And then the third thing I would take, you can't take the politics out of the railway because we're so heavily subsidised. Yeah. But the level of micromanagement that's currently going on, which nobody ever intended, it will do long-term harm. And I think the Secretary of State has acknowledged that in his Bradshaw address. But we've got to find our way out of that. Because we've got some fabulous people with fabulous ideas. We've got creativity. Yes, we're short on a younger generation, but there are some amazing people, genuinely awesome people. Yeah. Where I go around and just absolutely, I think if I was if I was a fraction of how good they were, if I was as good as they are currently, just amazing. So, but we've got to give them the space to lead. And be creative. So track and train together, industrial relations on a genuine, engaged, open listening, and then taking officials and ministers well away from the railway, and then holding the railway to account to deliver. Not not leaving us to our own devices, but setting very clear parameters of what's important, and then expecting us to deliver against them. And us facing the consequences if we don't. We're grown up,
Of course, yeah.
Nobody wants a cushy life. We just want a life where actually you're able to deliver.
Yeah, it feels like, and I was amazed, I've been working with the rail industry for just over 10 years. I had no idea before I came in the amount of influence and impact that the politicians have on this industry. I had not a clue. So I'm going to assume that the vast majority of the public, and certainly the travelling public, will have no idea the amount of I can use this word, but because I'm not involved with it directly, but interference that the government that the government have in terms of how we run the railway is significant, isn't it?
Yeah, well, partly, of course, because so much money. I mean, if you look at how much money went in to keep the railway open during COVID, and how much money is being spent now, it's billions and billions of pounds. So you'd expect government to be interested, and you'd expect government to call the big shots.
Yes,
it's the detailed operational decisions, the detailed commercial decisions, which is profoundly wrong. It's not good business. It's not good policy or good politics. And it doesn't lead to the best outcome. And we've slid into it unintentionally.
Yeah. I think you've used your 3 wishes wisely there, Andrew. I think there are some headlines there that everyone tuning into this podcast will deeply understand and agree with. I'm gonna chuck another one in just very quickly, because you've mentioned this magic word for me, people, several times as we've gone through. Acknowledge that we've got some genuinely amazing people in this industry sector. We've talked about ageing workforce and not enough people coming in at the other end. We've got a skills issue that's going on in terms of have we got enough of the skills, and have we got the right skills to lead us forward into the future? And have we got a workforce that represents the communities that we serve? So I think there's quite a lot of work still to be done in all of these areas in terms of the people and kind of lots of critical stuff to be done. You've shared with us, as we've gone through the conversation, you've shared some names of people who've inspired you throughout your career, and I've had no doubt continue to do so. But one of the kind of time-honoured ways of bringing this conversation to a close on the podcast is to say to you, where do you go for your inspiration? Is there a quote? Is there a book? Is there, is it an individual? Where do you get your inspiration from?
So lots of sources. It's the joke with my leadership team that I'm a voracious leader, and I'm always referring them to things I've picked up, and they hate it when I use the Henry Kissinger phrase, "Is this your best work?"
Right.
Which I always think is a brilliant way of as when you have to time manage. Looking somebody in the eye and say, right, you're about to give this to me. Is this your best work?
Yeah, or
are you actually giving me your second or third? But look, for me as an individual, I get back to the Bible. I come back. I was I became a Christian at quite a young age, and it's always been very formative in my life. Doesn't mean I'm a brilliant person. Does not mean that I would never put myself out there as better than anyone, far from it, and I'm a huge respecter of other religions, but it's been a real source for me, because it's so the things I go back to in the Bible are the fact that I'm loved, and therefore I don't need to prove myself, that I'm expected to be humble, and that I was put on earth to do good things. And there's a lot of noise about religion, and there's a lot of people who are alienated from it because of religious practices and religious behaviors and people who've done the wrong things. But the heart of the Christian faith and many faiths are those fundamental things, that I'm loved, that actually I'm no better than anyone else, and I've been put here to do good things. And it's a really powerful combination for me, because you don't feel the pressure. The fact that you're loved means you don't feel the pressure to overprove. But you're incentivized to do the good things, and you always recognize that however big you think you are, as I said, in the firmament of the universe or the galaxy, you're a tiny, tiny piece. Doesn't mean you can't do good things. Doesn't mean that you're not valued, but it helps you keep in that context. And so that's what I would always go back to as my source. But as I said, every time I keep notes on my iPhone of all the bits I read in books.
Yeah,
I like that, and it's phenomenal. What about you? Where do you go to?
I read
you're
a lot.
Always so positive in your outlook. Where do you get your positive energy from?
Well, thank you. I do try my best, and some days are really easy, and some days require a little bit more energy and focus.
Yeah.
And I would say I do listen to podcasts, Andrew, and I kind of a bit random with it as well. So I'll go onto Spotify, and there's a number of them that I just click on it. I don't go and choose one. I just click on it and say, right, next episode. And I trust completely that the one that I've clicked on will have the message that I need to hear that day. And this never lets me down. It always is there.
Wow.
I read a lot. And I
podcast roulette.
Exactly. Oh, I like that. Yeah, podcast roulette, definitely. I do read a lot. I'd like to have more time to read, and my concentration levels are all not always as great as I would like them to be. So reading's a kind of a bit hit and miss these days because my head's a bit full. But the other side to that, I guess, is when I need to kind of just take a breath. Being outside, I'm really lucky where I live. We're surrounded by fields.
I remember you telling me to go.
Go out with the dogs and just let them off the lead, see them having a good time. The joy of being out and about in the fresh air amongst nature, listening to the birds. At the minute, we've got the lambs bleating as well. It's just switch off. It's simple things, very much simple things. And learning every day is a school day, and I like learning. I'm like a sponge. So
it's interesting you should say that, because I do think that an inquiring mind is one of the things that actually keeps people more open. Keeps people actually more engaged. And actually, I think is in a strange way actually gives people a bit more confidence as well. And I think very often a lack of inquiry can come out of a lack of self-confidence or a hesitation.
I think the other thing, as you're saying that to me, one of the things around inquiring mind and curiosity, inquisitiveness, my daughter is at the University of Leeds at the moment doing a degree in history and sociology. And some of the subject areas, the modules that she's researching to write essays on, or when I look at them, I get a real kind of sense of envy, because I didn't go to uni. I left school after my O levels, not even GCSE. But Neve's going, and some of the subject matter that she's looking into and discussing and debating is absolutely fascinating. So that's probably. Well, the essay she's writing at the moment is around the Muslim faith in particular, and how that has changed in relation to dealing with society at large on the fear of terrorism. So how do people who practice the Muslim faith, who are just like you and me, going about their daily lives, but are being treated differently because of the way that they might present themselves in terms of how they dress or where they go to say their prayers, and the lack of understanding is quite phenomenal. So Neve's quite challenging in that way, because we have some really great rich conversations. But the other side to this, I'm reading a book at the moment by a lady called Laura Bates, and it's called Fix the System, Not the Women. The statistics in this book, Andrew, absolutely just shocked me. And I know about this stuff. I read about this stuff, and I am a female. So some of it I could relate to, but other stuff and the statistics surrounding it are horrific. So that's the other side to reading, is that I read things that are really uncomfortable. But I think we have to get more comfortable being uncomfortable in order to make the change happen. I could talk to you for hours, but you've got a very senior Labour politician going to be knocking on your proverbial door in about 7 minutes time.
And I need to get my head into the space for that one.
Absolutely. So
it's been lovely to talk anyway.
Quite a different conversation to the one we've just had, I would imagine. But I wish you a very good rest of the day. I can't thank you enough for taking the time out of what I know is a chock-a-block schedule. I've really enjoyed the conversation.
Likewise.
Thank you so much. And
thank you, Nina. And thanks for doing this and making it available to people, because I know how much it gives people a source of hope and gives people helps with that whole issue of being inquisitive and inquiring. So
absolutely,
good on you.
Thank you so much. Enjoy your day. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Huge thanks to Andrew for that really insightful conversation and for being willing to give up his time to come and join me on the Intuitive Insights podcast.